and welcome to another episode of the Influential Nonprofit. Of course, I'm your host, I'm Miriam. I work with nonprofit leaders to master the art of influence so they can ask for and receive all they want, need, and deserve. And I'm with Rhea Wong. And Rhea, what I help people do is master the art of influence so they can ask for what they want without feeling rejected, ineffective, or pushy. And, and I'm so excited because those are the things people don't want to feel. And I think that is going to play into a lot of what our topic is we're going to talk about today, which is executive directors and their role in fundraising. So welcome, Rhea.
Marianne, it is so good to be here. And I am excited to talk about this because I talk about this all the time.
Good. And okay, now, before we get into that, I always ask the first question, which is, tell me something you're really proud of that you don't get to brag about a lot.
Well, here's the thing. I feel like I used to be able to brag about it, but I really haven't done it. So I dabbled in stand-up comedy here in New York for a couple of months before the pandemic really shut down my burgeoning career. And by burgeoning career, I meant I did free open mics. So that's not I wasn't getting booked at the Comedy Store. But
right.
it took a lot of guts to get up on stage and tell some jokes and embarrass my family. So yeah. And
I
I'd like to
love
get
that.
back into it. Yeah.
Is that the goal then, to get back into that one day?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, life gets in the way, but I will say the pandemic did not do my comedy career any favors.
Experiences like that, there's so much more than like stand up, right? Like the stand up is the tool, but when I hit 50, 51, I have this like theory in my life. It's called, I'm not going to swear on my podcast, but F it, I'm 50, right? And you just do stuff that you never thought you'd do. And my F it, I'm 50 was I joined burlesque. That's the logical thing that you do when you're 50.
Marianne, I'm
I
so
know. And I did
impressed.
burlesque 1, 2, and 3. And 3 was pretty revealing. And it was so much more than it was about confidence, you know what I mean? And taking up space and standing in your value, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Releasing
good
the
for
outcome.
you.
So I think it's just kind of the same thing as that stand up, you know what I mean? Of just
Yeah.
standing, releasing the outcome, let it happen, let it flow, getting your
Yeah.
message across. I don't know. It was, yeah. So things like that are really, really cool. I would have continued, but the person who ran this school, who I really liked, to move to New Orleans to get some more, just to further her career. And I kind of, went over, but it served me well for the time. Okay. So I have never
Love
talked
that.
about, thank you. And I love the stand up for you because I get, like I said, I get where that is coming from. Just that
Yeah.
stretching yourself
Well,
for no other reason, just to stretch yourself, you know?
yeah, well, and I will tell you, I actually was so part of what I do is I train fundraisers, and I think I was thinking about somehow making stand up part of the training because the thing is with stand up, like burlesque, I mean, you're really kind of naked, emotionally speaking, on the stage, and you get through your 5 minutes. And maybe people laugh or maybe they don't, but in either case, like nobody dies, right? And I think
Right.
it's building that muscle of doing hard things, doing things that scare us and show us that the world will not end if people don't laugh at your jokes, or
Right.
the world will not end if you take your clothes off in front of people. It's okay.
Exactly. And, for me, it's one of the things that I work with the people that I coach on is the idea of like staying sovereign no matter the outcome. It's not about the outcome, right? It's
Yeah,
about holding your value no matter the outcome, which I
that's
think
right.
parallels to all of these things, which I think is actually, I don't think I know, is really a key for success. Is if they say yes or no, or if they laugh or not, I still have value, right? Like
Yeah.
I decide who has value.
Well, and I think that's such a thing for fundraisers, right? They equate their value as people to the amount of money that they raise. And at the end of the day, you have no control over whether or not someone says yes or no, right? Like you listen, I've tried really hard. I have yet to be able to control someone's mind.
Right.
And so I think we need to equate the value of just having inherent value as a human being. And did I do everything I could to set up the ask the right way? Because that is within my locus of control. And beyond that, it's out of my control, right? So the value that you have is really who you are in your being, and from the being you do the things, but whether or not the results or the outcomes come in the way that you want, it doesn't mean that you are less than or more than.
Right. And one of the things that, I work with people on is exactly that. Like, you don't get to say who or when. Because if we could, we would literally not be sitting here, right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't get to say who or when. That's the universe's job, right? Your job is to just stay in motion and stay in service and stay in value. And it's the same thing. We're just using a little bit different language of like just releasing the outcome. You don't, right? You don't know whether they're going to say yes, and that doesn't determine your worth. And because what we're going to talk about, is the executive director's role in fundraising is often that we avoid those situations because we don't want to feel uncomfortable or feel rejected or feel any of the things that that's going to trigger if something doesn't go our way. And I'd just love for you to talk just a little bit more about what you see as, ideally the role of executive director in the fundraising.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. So, Marianne, I can't stress this strongly enough. I think executive directors are the chief fundraisers. And I say that because as executive directors, you are the face of the brand, so to speak. You are the spokesperson for the organization. And if you are not actively fundraising, if you don't think it's your job to go out and talk to people and get the resources that you need to fulfill your mission, I would say you're probably not doing your job. Now, I think, and people have pushed back on this, but I still feel very strongly about it, an ED should be spending anywhere from 65 to 80% of their time fundraising. I equate it to,
Wow.
for example, I know, which, I'm guessing many EDs aren't doing that. And full disclosure, I've never been a DOD. I've always been an executive director who fundraised. Now, a lot of times I will talk to EDs or I'll train EDs and I'll say like, well, what are you doing? And they'll say things like strategy. I'm like, first of all, I don't really know what that means. Like that means you're probably sitting in your office, like answering emails or whatever. I mean, and I don't want to be flip about it. I get that being an ED means that you have many, many different things to do. What I would say though is that there is only a small quadrant in which you as the executive director are delivering the highest value to the organization. And I think if a lot of EDs just stop to ask themselves, what is my highest and best value to the organization? It would probably be in fundraising, in building external relationships, perhaps in managing the board, and everything else can be delegated, right? So I think a lot of times, and I find this a lot with founders, is they start an organization because they love the work. I call it, hugging the panda bears. Like maybe you started this organization because you really want to hug the panda bears.
Yeah.
As the organization grows, your job changes. Your job is no longer to hug the panda bears, even though you really love to hug the panda bears, right? And I think if we're not being very clear with ourselves about what the organization needs from us and the role that we play in it, we're doing the organization a disservice. That's why we get founder syndrome, right? Because founders often operate as if they are still, the frontline program person, when in actuality, they need to be the chief fundraiser. And so a lot of the times with founder-led organizations, I find, not always, but, in general, there is a cap at which they find themselves because the founding executive director is not as engaged in fundraising as they might need to be, and or they are unable or unwilling to upgrade the systems around them in order to bring in more resources. They sort of need to professionalize and haven't realized that the world has changed around them because they're still operating as if they're, that 1 or 2 person shop hugging the panda bears.
Right. Well, and I there's a part of me when you were speaking that was because that's safe and comfortable and they know how to do that. When you put those systems in place, now you've opened yourself up. Like one of the women I coach, she's a director of development. Her story was, I have all this admin stuff, so it's hard to fundraise, So they got her an admin, and now she's like, oh crap.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I have to step into the uncomfortable space, right? Step into and push myself a little bit more. And so you kind of want to stay in those places that and are comfortable for you. And I also feel like Guy was part of an organization where the founder, after many years, was actually like dismissed by the board. He really couldn't run an organization. That's, and like do those things. And then what I hear in your description of the 65 to 85% is really just a focus on relationship building, right? That external relationship building and you know, towards the end of fundraising, is that, or am I missing that?
Yeah, I mean, so Marianne, there's so many things here. So on the question of discomfort, I think a lot of times the reason why people feel uncomfortable with fundraising, and executive directors in particular feel uncomfortable with fundraising, is a lot of times they've never been properly trained, right? I wasn't properly trained, right? So of course you're going to feel uncomfortable doing something you've never been taught how to do. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, a lot of times the advice that people get around fundraising tends to be super transactional, right? It's almost like, oh, they teach you how to do sales. Like, well, you just have to like call enough people, and then you say some magical combination of words in a pitch, and then they magically give you money. Now, I don't know about you. I have never given off the back of someone's magical words, right? I've given because it's a cause I care about. I've given because somebody I love asked me to give. I've given because the cause has meant something to me personally. A pitch has never done it for me. So I'm on a single woman mission to ditch the pitch. Now,
Yes.
When we talk about fundraising, and yes, I believe the vast majority of it is relationship building, because at the end of the day, it's about trust. So if I don't trust you, there is no business that we transact, whether it's a for-profit or not for profit, right? Like if I go on Amazon, if I don't trust that the product is going to do the thing it says it's going to do, I'm not going to buy it. If I am talking to you as a nonprofit leader and I don't trust that you are going to steward my money and do the thing you tell me that you're going to do, I'm not going to donate. So I think that that's right. And I also think that EDs have to think about relationship building in addition to conversions. So a lot of times it's like, yes, it is about relationship building, but at some point you're going to have to make the ask. Like at some point you're going to have to be in that uncomfortable position of solicitation. Now, if you've done the relationship building correctly, then the ask will just feel like a natural progression. Some of the ways that I've seen people screw this up, and I'll speak from experience, I'll own it, I've screwed it up myself, is number one, they usually wait too long to ask, right? And so you get into this weird friend zone of like, okay, now this person thinks that we're just like friends and they like think I want to hang out with them, and now it's awkward, right? I've done that a million times. Or they rush to the ask before they really established trust, before they've really established a relationship. Those are kind of the two biggies. The third actually is maybe not being strategic with their time. So they'll spend a lot of time with their $100 donors, whereas they have a potentially $100,000 donor prospect, but because they're uncomfortable with the money, or they're uncomfortable with the ask, or they have some kind of opinion about money and the people who have it, they're mismanaging their most valuable resource, which is time. So I think there's a fine distinction here between relationship building, which I believe is the crux of fundraising, balanced with also understanding that you're there to do a job, right? You can't just sit and make friends forever and ever and ever without ever asking. So I think that's the fine balance I would point out.
I think I have a philosophy like called the fantasy relationship. And that's when, somebody says, oh, let me think about it, get back to you, or can you send something over? And then you assume that they're interested. And now you keep following up, and I'll put them on my email list, and they've been on your email list for 5 years and they've never they're not, but we hold on to them because we want to hold on to the fantasy, right? Like that one day, if we say the right thing or the magic thing, they're just going to start caring. And I have a philosophy called the philanthropic heart, where, we give not because of the right words, and I love words, but we give because of the mission aligns with our own personal belief experiences, right? Like our lived experiences. And instead of trying to get somebody to care, which you can't, I don't believe you can, like just roll with this other way where you're just, like, hey, if there's an alignment, great. If not, that's okay too. It's so great to know you. Right. Yeah. Like, you know what I'm saying? And so you can kind of understand how to, and I use the word, prospects. So you're spending the majority of time on your most valuable prospects. Yeah. Right? And that is a strategic thing. And for people like in the nonprofit space, I think are very kind. It can often feel a little disingenuous, you know what I'm saying, in a way. And I see it all the time, what you're talking about. I mean, they're really great at rapport, relationship building. But when it comes to like moving it to business, moving it to like, hey, is there something on the table? And it kind of like, then it gets awkward, and I think if you listen, people will tell you what they're ready for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So many things there. So I agree with you. Hope is not a strategy. So what I see a lot is that people chase after people who have no intention of ever giving, right? So I think hope is not a strategy. B, you have to read the signs. It's almost like dating, right? If you're
Absolutely.
out in the dating world and you're chasing after someone who's not returning your phone calls, perhaps they're telling you that they're not that interested in you. They're just not that into you, to use a 90s phrase, right? So
Right.
why don't you actually engage with the people who are into you? So I think that's the other thing. You said something that I generally agree with, but I will push back a little bit. You said you can't make people care. I actually think you can if you tell the story in the right way. So I'll give you a quick example. I was part of this training class, big fundraising training class, and one of the women there was running an organization for basically to get senior citizens who were unsafe to drive off the road. And I was like, I don't care about that. Like, I live in New York City. I don't drive, like, whatever.
Right.
She told this really amazing story about how her son, her little 3-year-old son, was run over by a 98-year-old person who really should not have been driving, right? And all of a sudden I was like, oh, now I care about this issue. So again, I don't think you can get everyone to care about all of the things, but I do think that if you deliver a story in the right way, in an emotionally compelling way, in an authentic way, you can get people to care about the thing.
Right. It'll ignite
if you
something
make it
in them.
relatable to them.
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. I also think to your point about, why do people give? So I did an analysis of all of the giving pledge letters, the billionaires who pledge their fortune, and they all write a personal letter about, why I do this. The top 2 reasons were to make an impact and to give back, right? We all have a story, a picture of movie in our own minds about who we believe we are in the world. And the more, as a fundraiser, the more I can tap into that story that you have about yourself. I'm the kind of person that, funds education. I'm the kind of person that gives back. I'm the kind of person that, gets impact in the world. The more I can help you realize that story that you tell yourselves when you lay your head on your pillow at night, the more I'm likely to bring you into the fold, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about how can I help you complete the story that you have of yourself and your impact in the world.
Right. And people give through, like, it's not because, this is how I see it. They give not because of the work. They give to create their own legacy through the work. Right. Like right. It's through, it's like, and so like, if I look at myself and I call myself, I'm a rescuer by nature. This is how I define myself. Like, I was a later in life kid. I always felt left out and left behind. I struggled with self-worth because of that. I gravitated towards anyone who I felt was sort of left out or left behind. My kids are adopted out of foster care. I foster dogs, and I am drawn to organizations that are like, foster adoptive care coalition, stray rescue. That is my thing now. And yes, there are times when I have been compelled to care about other, other situations. But I, in the end, that's the legacy that I want to leave, right? Like, that's what I lay, when you talk about laying your head down, like, what that would be part of, because it's so baked into me. It's part of like the legacy that I would want to leave is, helping create like empathy and love for, those are marginalized. That's how that's how I would look at the world. And I think you're right. Like, I want to tap into that, right? Like what I call it pains and gains, right? Like, what's the legacy you want to leave? And giving back is like the form of, like the most, I don't know how to say this, but it's the most sophisticated or highest form of living that we have, like giving back. That's right. And so tapping into that is such a beautiful thing to allow people to do.
Yeah, what's really interesting too, because I think that, again, this is like a very broad brush, but I think there are a lot of people who haven't really thought about their purpose. They haven't really thought about the things that they want to leave behind. Generally speaking, people don't really start thinking about that till after they're 50 and older. But for example, like this past weekend, I was at a birthday party and I was sitting across from this woman who worked at a hedge fund, very successful, 2 kids, husband, house in New Jersey, etc. And I, she's probably in her 40s. And I was asking her, like, so what are you really passionate about? What do you like to do? What really lights you up? And she couldn't answer the question. And I think, unfortunately, I think that's the state of a lot of people. We kind of live this unexamined life. But I think what I'm seeing, especially with a lot of people of significant wealth, they realize that one more Tesla, one more country home, one more private jet isn't going to bring them happiness. What's going to bring happiness is someone's life is better, or I've left something of value behind for future generations. And I think the more we can help people not just live that, but also even realize that, the bigger gift we've given them.
All right. So I want to go back to the 65 to 85% and any EDs that sort of were listening to this in the car and drove off the road and had to recenter themselves.
Don't drive off the road. Don't drive off the road.
Okay. So what I want to get to is like, if you're like, whoa, like I am not doing that. Maybe I'm spending 10 to 20%.
Yep.
How can they start making that shift? How can they start stepping into the fundraising?
Yeah, I love that. Okay, well, so the first thing that I would say is to get really, really real with yourself about, what is my appetite for fundraising, right? Because if it's one thing if you haven't ever been taught how to do it and you're willing to learn. It's another thing if you're absolutely like, I am not going to do this. This is not something that I want to do, that I want to learn how to do, that I want to do better, because then I think the conversation becomes like, maybe this may not be the right position for you moving forward. If you want the organization to grow, right? If your thing is like, hey, we're good with being the size that we are and we don't want to grow and we don't want to bring any more money, then like, vaya con Dios, maybe you're in the right spot, right? So I think first we have to have enough self-awareness and enough kind of regulation of our ego to realize that the mission is bigger than us as people, right? Like I was very clear as an ED, even though my identity was very wrapped up in being an ED, it was bigger than me, right? If everything goes right, the organization I was running will live on far beyond me. Now, that being said, I have a fun activity that folks can start to do. So I'm recently obsessed with this book called 10X is easier than 2X, which I would really recommend. It's by Dan Sullivan. So here's a fun activity that your people can do. So everyone get a pen and a piece of paper and write this down. So I want you to write down 3 things on a piece of paper. So we'll call this your rockets list, right? So when we're launching a rocket into space, like these are our boosters. So thing 1 is something that you love, that you permanently love and that you're really good at, right? So write that down.
Okay.
Number 2, write down something that gives you confidence. Like, what do you do? So in your case, maybe it's burlesque. Maybe in my case, it's, stand-up comedy, whatever. Something that gives you confidence. And number 3, something that will fuel the growth of the organization. Something that will fuel the growth of the organization, right? Okay, so that's the first list. Then the second list is what I call the rocks. The rocks are the things that weigh you down, because at the end of the day, all we really have is our energy. And the more energy we can get, the more energy we can apply to furthering the mission, the further we're going to go. So these are the rocks that I want you to make a list of. So the first rock is something that you do that other people are better at. And I know all these EDs are out here listening. For me, it was finance. I was like, why am I messing around with all these spreadsheets when I have all these people around me who are better at that, right? I actually have accountants on my board. Why am I messing around with spreadsheets? So something that you are not good at, that other people are better at. Something that sucks your energy, right? And the third is a relationship that is going nowhere. Okay. Everyone have that? So then go back to the first list in the next 3 months, I want you to schedule some concrete time in your calendar to do 3 of these things. They can be weekly, they can be monthly, they can be daily, right? But within the next 3 months, I want you to schedule in on the calendar, because if it's not on the calendar, it does not exist.
Exactly.
Time to do actually 3 out of the 3 things, not at the same time necessarily, but make time on your calendar. Okay. Make sense? Then the second thing I want you to do is, beside each of the rocks, so the things that you're not good at, the things that suck your energy, the relationship that is going nowhere, I want you to put down either eliminate, delegate, or automate.
Okay.
Okay. Then I want you to do that. And you do this every 3 months. So this is like every quarter you check in with yourself and you do that. And you don't take on the things, right? Once you've eliminated them. Once they're eliminated, they're permanently eliminated. So by the end of 12 months, by the end of 12 months, you will have hopefully 12 things that are on your calendar that really light you up, and 12 things that you've let go of that really suck your energy. And you should do this for everybody on the team. Now, you might say to me, hey, Rhea, how about the thing that's like sucking my energy? I don't have anybody to delegate that to. Well, then I think you either have to think about getting creative, right? So does it look like maybe a board member or a volunteer, or maybe one of your staff members has a hidden skill set that you didn't know about, right? Or maybe it's an administrative task. Well, look, there's this thing called the internet.
Yes.
And it allows us to use global arbitrage, right? We can find people online. I mean, there are people in India who have MBAs who I'm sure would be thrilled to do your spreadsheet for you at a fraction of the cost. And sometimes, because we don't think of our time as money, we end up doing what I call, my friend Brooke would call like $1 tasks versus $1,000 tasks. So like that 2 hours that I spend mucking around in a spreadsheet, I could have been using to talk to a donor that potentially could have been $20,000, right? So really thinking about managing your time and your energy as your most valuable resources is going to be really, really key here, because to give ourselves permission to let go of things that do not serve us anymore means that we can then put ourselves in the flow of things that will really serve us and that will really serve our organization.
Exactly.
I hope that makes sense.
It does. It makes sense, because I say it all the time. We release what no longer serves us to make room for what does. And you're absolutely right. And I wish nonprofits would look at this before, like more like the executive directors and things. There is so much help. Like, I mean, I don't know, I have a VA. She's in South Africa. She does a bunch of great stuff for me, and I pay her like $20 an hour. And, there are some very, I said, great people all over the world that can help you with some of these tasks. And, until maybe you staff up and you bring it, or whatever. I feel like if you're determined, if you make a commitment that this is something important to delegate, you'll find you'll find the solution. And again, sometimes it's like, oh, I'm going to stay in the safe space of the spreadsheet rather than take what feels risky to, call on people, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's totally emotional. So actually, last week I did a training with someone and we talked about this very thing. And he was like, oh my God, you're right. He's like, I wouldn't pay someone the salary that I'm getting in order to do data entry. I was like, yeah, you're probably the world's most expensive data entry admin. He's like, oh my God, you're right. So we really have to think about the cost of doing business. And then the second thing I'll add is, a lot of times, and I think this is really rooted in the scarcity mindset of the nonprofit world, but we think of expenses as pure expenses, right? We just see it as money out the door. And especially if you're fundraising, this happened to me. I'm like, geez, I sweat and bled for every single dollar that comes in. Like, we can't just spend it willy-nilly. However, I have a really interesting way for you all to think about expenses. An expense is a good expense if it does one of 3 things. And if it does all 3 things, then it's an awesome expense. A, if there is a return on your investment. So that usually looks like spending money on a good CRM system so you can see your data, spending money on development staff. Like, literally, does $1 in mean that I get $2 out, or hopefully more than $2, but there's a return. The second thing is, do I get a return on time? Time is your most valuable resource. So if that looks like you pay $20 per hour for a VA in South Africa, but that gives you 10 hours of your time back so you can actually focus on fundraising, then that is a good use of your money. And the third is operational efficiency. So if I hire somebody and the operations become more efficient, our programs get better, we get better at doing the thing that we do, then that is a good use of time. So I want you all to like put any expense through those three filters. And if the answer is no to those filters, then you probably should not spend the money.
I love that. And you're right. It is rooted in scarcity. I don't want to let go because I'm afraid of where the next one's going to come from. And I have to, I have to keep everything close. And we don't value time the way we value money. We think, oh, right. I'd rather just, now you don't have to. I remember I would tell people to, because now you can do it for free, but to like upload a video and get it transcribed. And I could see everyone's faces in the crowd thinking, oh, I'll just do that. I don't want to pay for that. Right. And then I would ask people, now, how many of you just said, you know what? No, I said, because you're going to spend an hour transcribing this video and you can upload it, and for, very little money, have it done. But that was always the first thought. The default thought was, oh, we can just do that here. And, and like, then you wind up spending, what is that? The dollar, you spend the dollar. What did you say? The dollar versus the
dollar task versus $1,000 task.
Yeah, right. Well, that's a dollar task,
Yeah, for all of the EDs out there, I would actually suggest that you might think about doing this, which is take your salary, divide it by the number of hours that you work in a year, right? And I'm not talking about like crazy ED hours. I'm talking about like, normal people hours, right? And that'll give you more or less your ballpark hourly rate.
Sure.
And then when you're doing tasks, ask yourself, like, is the hourly rate that I'm spending on paying myself more or less than the value of this task? And what I'd be willing to bet is that most of the time, the task is less money than what you're paying yourself to do it.
I would say,
does that make sense?
Or they would never pay somebody that much money to do whatever they're doing, like to fill in the spreadsheet or transcribe the video.
Right, exactly. Like, would you pay someone $200 an hour to input this data? No. Well, that's what you're doing with your organization right now.
Doing. Yeah. Yeah. That's such a great way to look at it. All right. I want to switch a little bit. Like, how do you, because I you work with organizations, right, to help them raise more money. And how do you work with clients? What does that look like? What is it like to work with you?
Yeah. So great question. So I actually don't do one-on-one work anymore. So the only way that folks can work with me is by joining my fundraising accelerator, which I offer twice a year. It's a group coaching program. And honestly, we've gotten fantastic results. People are regularly 10x to the most extreme, someone like 400x their investment because of the strategies that we learn. And so it's part of it is the learning that we get, the content, but the other part of it is really the community, right? Yeah. Because so often, especially EDs, this is a really lonely job. And I totally get it. You are up against things that nobody else is up against. There are things you can't talk about with anybody else, right? You can't talk about it with your board or your funders or your staff because maybe those people are the problem. It's a really lonely job. And I think when we think about burnout, I work with the performance coach. He talks about this Harvard study. They examine what burnout actually is, and burnout is not correlated to the amount of work you had. Burnout is correlated to the amount of loneliness that you feel.
Wow.
And so being an ED can be a lonely job if you don't have other people that you can talk to about the ups and the downs and the challenges. And so I think a big part of what I do in the cohort is we create a community so you don't feel so lonely in your job. We give you the confidence to do the thing that might scare you. And we give you the content so you actually know how to do it. So it's a mix of the emotional, the psychological, and the tactical,
right?
Which I think a lot of people have appreciated. And so right now we're running our 9th cohort. So there have been 9 cohorts that have gone through. I've trained over 100 people. And, it's just been fantastic. I really love it.
Yeah. I love that because I have the same model. I do group coaching. I do some one-on-one, but only after people have done the group. And and then I have a back end. So I do this, it's called Up Level Your Influence. And then after that I have a long-term. So that's a year program that people can stay if they really want to master the skills. But I love the group coaching model for all the reasons that you just said. And I want to say this because I think this is important, especially for people who are, I'll just say this. I want to see how you react, because what I have found is, especially in fundraising, that can be triggering, right? Like that brings up all kinds of stuff. They say, oh, okay, I'm going to hire this consultant and pay them this money, and then I won't have to think about fundraising. And that, right. And this is why I'm a coach. I'm not a consultant, right? I'm a coach and trainer because I feel like what can happen is, and I'm not saying it happens all the time, but I'm saying what can happen is that you're psychologically abdicating yourself from stepping into that role because you're going to pay somebody else. So if I pay this person, then I don't have to think about it anymore. And ultimately that's what breaks down that relationship, right? Is because you're not taking ownership of your outcomes.
Yeah, I love that. I 100% agree with you. I call it I often see that happening when people hire development directors, right? So your first development hire, like, great, I don't have to do fundraising anymore. Right. The truth is, if you're hiring a development director, you are now committing to fundraising more, right? It's just that your development director is getting all of the obstacles out of the way so you can focus on the most important things. And I call it the development fairy. I think this is why we see so much burnout in the development field. It's like the development fairy is not going to come down from the sky and wave a magic wand and magical money is going to appear. In fact, fundraising is it's a math problem. It's a learnable skill set, and you just have to do it. You have to get the reps in. There's no magic to it. There's no magical hire who's going to make money rain down from the sky. And if you think that there is, well, then I'm sorry to tell you, there's also no Easter bunny. Like I don't know.
Right.
I'm sorry if there are people listening with their children. There's no magical development fairy and there's no Easter bunny. I'm sorry.
That is so true. And just thinking about, I love because you're right. The same with the development person. I've seen it happen over and over again. I know you have too. Like, oh, I have this person, like they can make it rain. I don't have to worry about that anymore. And absolutely what you said is, no, you're actually going to be doing it more. This person is going to be removing the barriers and allowing it to happen and creating systems and structures to maintain that. And so many times, and that's why I sort of moved my model into more of a coach and trainer instead of the consultant model. And I'll just tell you this really, I'm working with this board, and one of the guys said, it's always the guy, and he's the treasurer, are you going to give us a report at the end to tell us what to do and what not to do? And I said, well, tell me what you want, tell me why that's important to you. And he's explaining, I said, so what I'm hearing is that you really want to have some clear direction of where you want to go. I said, yeah. I said, so what I see my role is that you're going to decide for yourself what your clear direction is. Like, oh, okay. Because when you decide, you're more likely to input. I'm not here to tell anybody what to do like that. But I have the ways that you can, figure out what it is that you want to be doing. But I thought that was so interesting because what he wanted is like, oh, that transaction, like you come in and you tell us what to do. Like, yeah, it's a little different than that. And it's going to work because the other way is not going to work, right? Like coming and having somebody tell you what to do. Again, you're abdicating the decision-making to somebody else. Like, please instead of taking ownership. And I think I use the word ownership a lot, ownership over your own outcomes. And all you're doing is putting you in place or me in place or whoever else in place to help you achieve those outcomes, not abdicating that. And that's why I like our model of work. And also I love the group coaching model for the same, like really helping people step into ownership of who they are and where they want to go and their next level of leadership and their next level of, of competence and growth. And I know you see that,
Well, and I will say one of the reasons why, and I know we're up against time, one of the reasons why I stopped doing one-on-one consulting or done for you consulting is people would hire me for development roles, right? And you step into it and you're like, oh, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Like if you're having problems with fundraising, it's usually because there are a whole host of other problems underneath that you haven't addressed. And so the hard thing for me, especially being, a bossy former executive director, I was like, let me just fix all the problems. And then it would like scope creep. And I was like, oh, the reason you're not fundraising is you don't actually have a strategy and you're actually not tracking your outcomes and you have the wrong people on the board and you have the wrong staff. That's a lot of problems to solve. And I just
Right.
realized that for my own sanity, I had to stop taking these on because nobody was going to hire me to do all the things. And it's almost like, going to the hospital and they're like, hey, I have a broken finger. You're like, yes, you have a broken finger, but you also have a sucking chest wound. So why don't we deal with the sucking chest wound? And they're like, no, but I just want you to deal with the finger. And I'm like, okay, well, okay.
Yeah. So it's so funny because that's why I don't respond to RFPs. Because it's like,
Yeah, me
we're
neither.
our own doctor and here's all the ways we're sick. What would it cost for you to make us well? And I look at that and I'm like, but I may see something totally different in what, in that assessment. I just really moved away from that model. Okay. Obviously we have a lot of affinity and this conversation could go on.
Yes, indeed.
So what's the best way that people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, I have a free podcast and a free weekly newsletter at rheawong.com, RHEAWONG.com. I'm also very on LinkedIn, and I host free weekly webinars with nonprofit. So if you want to get in touch with me, it is not hard to find me online.
Good. And okay, my last question is always my last question. I mean, stand-up comic burlesque, obviously we like a spotlight.
Yeah.
So tell me, if I was in New York or you're in St. Louis and we wind up at a karaoke bar. I love karaoke. It's one of my favorite things. Like when you ask me, what do I like that gives me confidence? Karaoke.
Love it.
What's your go-to song? What are you going to sing?
Okay. I've like 3 answers there. What I wish it were, because I love him so much, but I'm not a good enough singer to pull it off, is Purple Rain.
Okay.
What is fun to sing, which I can usually pull off, is Jesse's Girl.
That's a good one. Yeah.
And I also am a child of the 90s. So I love me some Lisa Loeb's Stay.
Oh, yeah.
Great song.
Yeah, that is a great song. See, I'm a child of I came of age in the 80s, I'll say. So yes, I have sang Lisa Loeb's Stay at karaoke, like when it was out, in the 90s.
My God, it's a great song. It's so angsty. It's so great.
Yes,
I have the glasses. I have the whole thing. Listen, Marianne, if you ever find yourself in New York, call me. We'll go out for karaoke.
We're in. All right, Rhea, it was so great to have you here. Thank you so much for all your wisdom. And all the links and everything will be in the show notes if you want to get in touch with her. And you are all over LinkedIn. It's hard not to find you.
It is literally hard not to find me. You'd have to actively avoid me if you're on LinkedIn. So yes, please get in contact.
All right, thank you so much. And
Thank
I'll see you next time on the Influential Nonprofit.